The thing about General Harwick Dune was that he had never once stood somewhere without needing everyone in the room to know he was standing there. I noticed it the moment the delegation's motorcade rolled through the Keldrath gates. 3 cars, flags on the bonnets of the lead and trail vehicles, a mid-level visiting military party from a country whose name I will not record here, because it does not matter. What mattered was the man who stepped out of the center vehicle before his aide had finished opening the door. A broad, decorated figure who looked at the south forecourt the way a buyer looks at livestock. I had been at this post for 22 years. I had stood through rain that came sideways off the river and heat that turned the cobblestones into a griddle. I had stood through a state funeral that lasted 6 hours, through a student protest that filled the street beyond the gates with noise and color, through a visiting head of state who sneezed directly onto my left epaulette at close range, and then looked mortified about it. I didn't move for any of it, not because I was incapable of moving, because the post requires stillness and I had chosen the post. Dune stopped 3 feet in front of me. He was a big man, wide in the shoulders, chest loaded with ribbons. The kind of face that had learned early that size was a form of argument. He looked me over the way you look at something bolted to a wall. Then he turned to his aide, a younger officer standing just behind his left shoulder, and said something in their language. The aide smiled in the careful way junior officers smile when the senior man has made a joke at someone else's expense. Then Dune switched to my language, loudly enough for the press pool gathered near the gate to hear. "Is he real?" he said. "Or is this a very convincing statue?" One of the Asha laughed. The press pool stirred. I kept my eyes on the middle distance. The river beyond the gates was visible between the iron posts, gray and flat in the morning light. "Does it come with a key?" Dune continued, addressing no one in particular now, performing. "You wind it up, it marches, it doesn't think?" I did not move. He took a half step closer. Not threatening, curious, the way a child approaches something behind glass, wanting to see if it will flinch. "Ceremonial," he said, as if pronouncing a verdict. "All show, no substance, a trophy for the tourists." He let that sit. Then he smiled. The comfortable smile of a man accustomed to rooms agreeing with him, and turned toward the vestibule entrance. The delegation followed. 2 of them glanced back at me as they went. I did not register the glances. What I was thinking, behind the immovable face, was this. I have stood in places this man has never been briefed on. I have done things that will never appear in any record he has access to. The citation that would tell him who I am is held in a ministry file with a classification level he does not hold. And none of that is his business, and none of it changes what this post requires, which is stillness, which I was giving it. I went on giving it. Inside the vestibule, the delegation was received by the palace's protocol officer, a composed woman named Hartley, who had been managing visiting dignitaries for 15 years and had the particular gift of making every man in the room feel welcomed and supervised simultaneously. I know what happened inside because Corporal Wren, who was stationed at the inner door, told me afterward, and because the ministry liaison, a quiet man named Aldous Frey, filed a brief account that I was later shown. Dune continued inside. The tour of the vestibule ceremonial hall proceeded as scheduled. He made 2 more remarks about the guard on the forecourt. The trophy, he called me again the wind-up man, and the attaché continued to smile in the way that juniors smile when the senior man is performing, and they cannot afford to stop. Frey arrived at 7 minutes past the hour. He was not part of the scheduled delegation reception. He was a small, unremarkable man in a dark suit, carrying a slim leather folder with the ministry seal embossed on the cover. He presented his credentials to Hartley, who read them and, without any visible change of expression, led him into the reception. Dune was mid-sentence when Frey entered. Frey waited. He was patient about it. When Dune paused, Frey introduced himself by title and directorate, a directorate whose name meant nothing to the attachés, but caused the visiting delegation's own intelligence officer, standing at the back, to go very still. "I have a document," Frey said, "that the palace asked me to make available to the delegation before the formal schedule proceeds." Dune looked at the folder the way he had looked at me. "A prop, a formality. My aide can, if the aide would read it aloud," Frey said. For the delegation's full awareness, that was the request. The aide took the folder, opened it, looked at the first page. He read it. It took 4 minutes to read. The vestibule was quiet the entire time. What the file contained was not classified, not the version Frey had brought. It was a deliberate, legal, ministry-approved summary. Active service record spanning 19 years before the ceremonial post. 3 operational deployments that could be named. 2 that could be described only by outcome. A commendation for conduct under fire, in circumstances that the summary noted had been reviewed and confirmed by two independent inquiry panels, a rank that at its peak had sat 2 grades above the rank of visiting General Harwick Dune. At the bottom of the summary, a note, in plain language, from the Directorate, to the effect that the Keldrath Palace Guard was not a ceremonial appointment made for appearance. It was a post offered, by request of the palace, to a man who had earned the right to choose what he did with the remainder of his service, and who had chosen this. The aide stopped reading. The room did not immediately fill with sound. Dune stood with the particular stillness of a man whose weight has shifted underfoot. His face did not change. He was too experienced for that, but something behind it recalibrated. His intelligence officer at the back of the room was looking at the floor. Hartley, perfectly composed, noted that the formal reception schedule would now need to be adjusted, as the honor guard escort that had been arranged for the delegation's departure, an escort that required the cooperation and availability of the South Forecourt post, was no longer confirmed. Dune's delegation left 40 minutes ahead of schedule. He did not come back through the forecourt. They took the secondary exit. At 12 minutes past midday, Corporal Wren appeared at the edge of my sight line and gave me a very small nod, the kind that passes between guardsmen who have worked the same gate long enough that words are beside the point. I did not respond. The post does not allow for it, but I noted it. The afternoon light came over the palace roof, and the cobblestones warmed. 2 tourists photographed me from the gate, and a small boy pressed his face against the iron bars and stared up at me with the total, uncomplicated attention that children bring to things that do not move. I stared at the middle distance, 22 years at this post, and the thing I have learned, the only thing really that this post has to teach, is that restraint is not the absence of strength. It is what strength looks like when it no longer needs to announce itself. The boy at the gate eventually pulled his face back from the bars and ran off after his parents. I stayed. That is the post. That is all it has ever been.